And everyone, Nick Ruiz from Virginia Railway Express.
Nick Miner, King George County, Economic Development.
Stephen Haynes, Speed Up.
Lee and Attorney for Commission here on behalf of GW Wright.
There you go, Ian.
Joe Bonds with the Fredericksburg Cycling Club.
Craig with City of Fredericksburg.
Alex Osiak with Stafford County.
And over there in the corner, we've got more staff.
Hi, Colleen.
Charlie Giselle,
And Becky Gold.
Becky, and they're with the FAMPO team. We've got some folks online. I see Tamara Banks, Amy Galvarini, and who's that?
Tamara Banks. There's Steve Thomas. I'm not sure. Y'all want to introduce yourselves that are online?
Yeah, Joe Stainsby, OmniRide.
Hi, Joe.
You got it.
Carrie Barber, FAMPO.
Hi, Carrie.
Tamara Banks of
sorry.
the Generation.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Clark Thomas, RACSB.
Hi there. How are you?
Tamara Banks, Healthy Generations.
Hi, Tamara.
Jennifer Faulkner, Healthy Generations.
Thank you, Healthy Generations. We're just introducing ourselves. Andrea, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, I'm Andy Smith. I'm from New York City, Mary, Washington.
Great. Is there anybody else that hasn't said hi? I think we've got everybody. One other person might be just arriving.
Clark Thomas from RACSB.
Hi, Clark. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi.
We're just introducing ourselves. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Anthony Cater with Spotsylvania County. Jacob was going to be in here.
All right.
Behind me, so.
And Matt, is it?
Yes.
Matt used to work for FAMPO about 100 years ago before I was there, which I only found out recently.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Why don't you introduce yourself? I'm just asking everyone to introduce themselves today.
Adam Lynch, Frank to the right hand.
There you go.
Matt, who do you represent now?
I'm with Spotsylvania.
We didn't introduce ourselves throughout this process, but seeing as it's been such a long summer break and it's been a while since we've seen each other, I just thought everybody should say hi. I'm going to kick off because we're past 1 o'clock. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate you all giving up your time to meet with FAMPO and look through what we're doing in this East-West study. From now until, well, actually from the last meeting, but especially from now through the end of the year, you're going to see the reports coming through as the study gets to making recommendations. And so you'll see some of that today, plus some new work on the roadways and so on. At our next meeting, if I'm correct, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the next meeting we meet, it's in 3 months' time, we should get a draft report on roadways, am I right?
Correct.
And the transit report you've already had. So this study is now rapidly producing outcomes that we can decide on whether we like, want to change, or whatever the case is, but we're getting to see some major progress happening over the next while. Hi, Jacob. In terms of attendance, this is not a committee of FAMPO. This is just a stakeholder group for discussion and information sharing. We don't make any formal decisions here, but I do usually just circulate an attendance register just so we can capture who was here. And if you give me 1 second, I'm just going to fetch it and pass it around. If anybody hasn't, just initial, and then if we've missed you, you could just add your name at the bottom so that we don't forget to send you a copy of the agendas and so on for these meetings. I'm going to move on to number 3, which is the Phase 1 draft report written by yours truly, so for what it's worth. It's not a very glossy, fabulous kind of presentation report. What I've essentially done is taken the memos, the technical memos that you've all seen many times over the last year that we've been meeting, and compiled them into a phase 1 draft report. So essentially everything in there you've already seen, except for each section there's an introduction and a conclusion which I drafted. So basically there's nothing new in there. So I didn't prepare a whole lot of slides to tell you what you already know and what you've already seen in the meetings. 1 or 2 new faces today, but if you just click on the website, you can download all of those technical memos. So there's nothing really new in that report. However, it is, I think, important to put it together in one place so that, you know, if I get hit by a bus, or as somebody at the office keeps telling me, no, Ian, when you hit the jackpot and win the lottery and retire on your luxury cruise yacht, there is one report in one place of what we did in phase 1. So I'm going to open it up for any questions that you have about that in a moment. But basically, if you recall, phase 1 did not produce any final recommendations for the study. It did all the introductory work, all the background, the existing conditions work. It looked at where there were problem areas that we as a committee identified or that we got from the data research to say where is there going to be congestion in the future, where are there accessibility problems, where are there problems in terms of bike and pedestrian accommodations and so on. And then looked at where people want to travel, right? We did market analysis. Do people want to go to Central Park, or do they want to go to Courthouse in Spotsylvania, or where do people want to go? And we also borrowed from last year's mega survey that we did in the FAMPO region to ask people what their concerns were about transportation and what infrastructure they'd like to see in the future. It borrowed from that. And then we started to change gears and looked particularly at transit first, and accessing the train stations, and looking at where we thought new bus routes might be needed. Some of that work was curtailed because Freight Transit asked us not to try to re-engineer any of their bus routes because they have a transit strategic plan, which they're doing, commencing now, in fact, with a consultant, and they wanted to be able to look at an integrated network and not have piecemeal recommendations on individual routes. So we removed most of those routes from our recommendations and future work, and we focused on really one rapid transit route, a possible transit center in Stafford, and bicycle and pedestrian access to the train stations. That's largely what we focused on in terms of recommendations of how to take it further. That concluded phase 1, including a list of specific roadway corridors and areas of concern that we wanted the phase 2 of this project to address. That's where we are with phase 1. That report just brings that all together in one place. If you see any typographical type errors or problems with it, please do email me. You all have my email address so that we can fix any errors or typos or problems with the report. Please email those to me. If anybody has any questions about that or comments about that phase 1 report, the floor is yours. Staff will take any questions you have about that. Remember, phase 1 was done largely by staff, and we got a grant from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, which we're very grateful to complete that phase 1, which effectively is complete when that report is adopted.
So FXB goes transit system, what did you call it? They're doing a network redesign right now.
The transit strategic plan.
Strategic plan. So that will not include that one high capacity transit route, the east-west route?
So it will, in the sense that we have a design and we're going to make a recommendation which we will hand over to their consultant who is working on the design, to include in that design.
Okay.
But we excluded tampering with other routes,
right, okay,
because they want to do a network
Yeah.
And if we start recommending, we did look at a high level at other routes. We looked at a possible express bus from Stafford into Central Park. Ridership didn't look great, but we did look at it. And we looked at a couple of corridors that lead to the train stations and where we thought slightly better aligned bus routes would be helpful, but we didn't make formal recommendations. We're leaving that to the TSP and the consultants and the stakeholder group of the TSP to do, because we would end up, you'd end up having two groups of people studying the same thing at just one after each other, and we agreed with Fred Transit that would be a waste of time and energy. So we'd say the same things over and over, and it would be even worse if they reached different conclusions than this group, because then we've got an even bigger mess to deal with. So that's why we did that. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick thing. For that phase one report, when would you want those comments by? Just timeline.
I'm going to take it to the TAC and to our other committees and so on. So it will serve as a September TAC. So if I could get those before the September TAC.
Okay.
That's the 15th. Becky, is it the 15th September TAC? Coley, do you remember? 12th. I beg your pardon. The 12th. The 12th of September. So if we could get those before then I can put those in.
Okay.
We're not going to send the phase one report out for public comment, because it doesn't make final recommendations. It passes the final recommendations on to the phase two of the study, because we needed further work done by our consultant. You really understand that? So it's not going to go out in a formal public comment process. The phase two draft reports will, because they will make final recommendations on, or draft final recommendations on buses, sidewalks, multi-use paths, highways, roadways, bridges. So that really does need public comment, and there'll be a formal public comment period. All done on the phase one report? Great. I'm going to hand over to BHB in a moment, who are going to share with us some presentations. A lot of it new stuff now that you haven't seen. So please do pay attention. We've broken it up, as you can see on the agenda, into three. First of all, roadways, and then bike ped updates, and then some update comments on that transit report, which you worked through in the last meeting. So over to the team. Chris, are you going to kick us off?
Yeah, I will. Drew, did you want to advance us through the slides? Yeah. And I understand from my colleagues, you can't see me on camera, but I am here in the corner. Chris Daly from VHB leading this project. Ian, you gave a great summary of the phase one progress, and what we're doing here today is picking up on phase two and the progress that we've made. You let me know when we're good to go.
All right.
So Ian made reference to the 13 corridors that had been identified as part of that phase one process. Since that time, phase two has looked into those 13 corridors. We've obtained the regional models. We've done some investigation of the models. The purpose of this phase two is to take those 13 corridors identified as phase one future congestion 2050 corridors, identify some potential projects to address that congestion in the future, and narrow that down to a set of 7 that we would then further refine as part of a preliminary engineering effort. Again, the goal is to get projects that could be constructible and fundable, identifying what those funding programs might be. And there's a variety of ways, and Alex, you were making some comments about how do we get one particular that we'll talk about in a little bit. How do we get it funded? Well, that's part of this phase two process, is to identify those routes for funding. In addition to the roadway projects that we'll talk to you about, there's the phase two transit piece that we talked about during the last stakeholder meeting. Just a quick update on that. We are finalizing the report this week. That will be to staff for a secondary review before it goes on to the TAC. We will be presenting in September. And then the third component, so we've got the transit, the roadway. Transit is pretty much near complete. Roadway, we're getting real close to putting together our report for that. Of course, we want to get some feedback from this group as well as staff. The third component would be our active transportation projects. There were 5 that were identified as part of phase 1. 4 of those we are proceeding to investigate. Now, the reason being, and I think we may have mentioned this during the last stakeholder meeting, is that one of those projects, the VRE station access, is being handled by a smart scale project already, so we didn't want to continue to investigate that further. It's being handled. And we'll show those on the next slide. So today we wanted to get the feedback on both the roadway projects that we've identified, the initial modeling and project identification, as well as the active transportation. So I will say that we did go before the Bike and Ped Committee last month with our findings and proposed projects. I know there's some overlap of individuals on that committee that are also part of the stakeholder group, I believe. And then, actually, can you, and then keep going? We'll just jump right into the, there we go. So much of this is repeat. So what I want to say is that the 13 corridors that were identified, it's based on what we're calling severe congestion. It's related to the volume to capacity ratio that's anticipated in the year 2050 using the regional model. You can go ahead and, these are the 13 corridors that we're studying. One thing I do want to point out is that there's one change from phase 1 into phase 2, and that was we replaced Kellogg Mill with Enon. That was based on some discussion as far as what our priorities are in the region, and Kellogg Mill fell out. We replaced that with Enon. So as I was mentioning, this phase, what we've done so far is, what we started out with was doing a validation of the model findings from phase 1, making sure that we had the right files. First of all, there were some discrepancies there, and then working through some of the discrepancies that we'd identified. For example, the model is from 2015, so there are some projects that have either been constructed, are under construction, or in the CLRP that we want to make sure that are in our modeling effort to make sure that we're not trying to fix a problem that's already been addressed with one of those projects. And we did find a few of those. So there was some back and forth with FAMPO, with VDOT, and their consultant to make sure that we have all of those projects accounted for. Then from that point, we identified those corridors. Again, we validated those 13 corridors with the severe congestion. And in a minute, Drew's going to jump into showing you where those congestion spots are on those corridors, followed by a segment of what we propose are potential improvement projects to address that. So again, keeping in mind that we're talking about 2050, as opposed to, say, the smart scale process that is looking at existing VTrans needs and congestion that exists today. What we're trying to do is be proactive and get ahead of those future congested areas to make sure that we have those projects in place. And I think with that, I think we're going to jump into those corridors, Drew.
Yeah, sure thing. So we'll walk through each of the 13 corridors, and I'll try to toggle both between the presentation as well as the Google Maps so we can really get the sense for where we're talking about, where some of our challenges are. As Chris mentioned, we're talking about 2050 congestion. So this is looking well into the future. And the areas of red that you see in these maps, these are the areas where we're looking at severe congestion. And I think most of us are deep in the transportation weeds, but some of us are not. And so to explain a little bit about the sort of the big metric we're going to be using, it's the volume to capacity ratio. That's how many cars are trying to move through based on how much capacity that road can actually handle. And an important thing is that this is a modeling exercise. It's at the regional level. It doesn't get into all the nitty-gritty of how traffic signals work and how, you know, the day-to-day movement of traffic through the network occurs. It's sort of this big picture question of, on this regional level, where are the flows of traffic and how does that relate to what these major and minor roads can actually handle? And our metric for severe is 0.89, 0.82, depending on the type of road, because the system is a sort of a fundamental rule. It's called Little's Law. As the system approaches capacity, not when it goes over capacity. So when it approaches capacity, that's when we start to see those large delays, the big backups, and that's why we look at 89% of capacity is where we're starting to look at, here's something severe that we want to address. You'll see some corridors in 2050, they're looking to be over capacity. And that's where we see the really large backup and delays when we see that number go above 1.
Quick question on that.
Yeah.
Before we move ahead. Does that translate roughly into like an LOSE? So it's like before you're failing, is that kind of what the severe congestion ratio is, or?
So it's a good question. I would say I would think about that E and then 1 definitely and an F. There's some, the thing we don't really have in detail that Chris could dive into more detail on is because we don't really have the signals deep into this. There are some situations where you could be at that level, and because of just the number of movements,
yeah,
you know, you can't feed the main line as much as you want. You could be looking at like an F condition because you just can't spread the traffic around in the time you have in that cycle.
Okay.
So I'm going to do something, wondering if anyone online tells me they can't see things, please let me know. So what we're going to do is just make sure that we've got, so here we go. We're going to work our way across the 13 corridors. And so here we're talking about the Courthouse Road on the Stafford side. And you can see that we're looking from Raymond Church Road, coming across 95 and ending up at Route 1 as an area where throughout in both the east and the west direction, we're doing that red. And anywhere on these charts that you see red, that's where we're looking at capacity over that severe metric. And here we have actually some segments where we get as high as 1.76, so almost 2 times the capacity of the road in terms of the level of traffic and congestion. And so this is a corridor that's decently congested to 2050, heading into, you know, really the future heart of Stafford County.
Drew?
Yeah.
So what you've done is you've looked at the 2050 model where there's going to be severe congestion, and then you've looked at the 13 roadway corridors and then identified which portions of those 13 roadway corridors in 2050 will be the most severely congested and where probably we should pay the most attention.
Correct, exactly. So our interventions are going to focus on those areas where we see the most red along those 13 corridors.
Great.
And one other question, just really quickly. The higher that number in 2050, the sooner theoretically we would need to do something. I'm not going to ask you, you know, when do you cross that threshold, but obviously that threshold occurs earlier the higher that number is. Is that a safe statement?
I think that's probably true, but
yes, that, I mean, and you know, the exact prioritization is something we're going to come to. It's going to be a nexus of how complicated, what are the impacts, how strong is the benefit against the cost and the complexity. So exactly saying, okay, this has 1.76, which is some of the worst congestion we see across these 13 corridors. Does that necessarily mean that's where we're focused on? Well, that's one data point in favor of it, but the point of this group and the engagement we'll have is to balance that against what does it take to get that to a reasonable place? What can we do in other locations? And we'll talk about some of our strategies as we go from this sort of situational awareness section to the projects of what are some of the ways that we at least are thinking about how you might tackle the problems. And as folks who have flipped through this maybe before, you'll see it's not just every project is add a lane on this corridor, starting to think about some other strategies as well. Any other sort of table setting about looking at these future conditions, what we call the no build from a technical standpoint? Okay, so our next corridor is going to be Warrenton Road. If we zoom in here, that basically, similarly, we see a pretty long stretch. There's a little bit of a break, but basically all the way from Hawley Corner across 95 over to Route 1, and that's a theme to keep in our head. We're seeing pretty much severe congestion in 2050. We do see another pretty high spike in one segment of up to 1.85, again, nearly twice, and then the average maximum VC. So that's throughout this entire area. What the metric we're using that was used in phase 1 is the average maximum. So this isn't saying, okay, you know, just through the entire peak, but basically on a daily basis, how high are we seeing VC spike throughout the day. And so in both the westbound and eastbound direction, throughout this corridor, we're seeing over one, the whole corridor being over capacity on average.
That's US 17, if anybody doesn't know where Warrenton Road is.
So here we have it on the Google as well. Moving here. And so then we shoot over here to Truslow. And you can see down in Google here. Now, Truslow is a different sort of road. It's a little more local in character. The one lane in each direction. There's some short turn lanes. And what we see here is sort of, as we start to try to get our awareness, as the network is sort of, the traffic is hunting for different east-west routes to go because it's got a lot of congestion here, right? This is well over capacity. We start to see severe but not quite as bad congestion in Truslow going from Route 1 and then crossing over to 95, and that dissipating a little as basically traffic distributes into the residential neighborhoods on the west side of 95. So we really see this, it's not the principal route driving a lot of the traffic, but it's becoming more congested as that east-west and north-south flows, we'll talk about more, just continues to grow to 2050. So that's, the nature of that road, as you can maybe see a little from Google, and we'll talk about more. So again, it's not this major arterial, but has more of that rural to residential character. Okay, and so then moving to our next stop here, going back north up to Garrisonville Road on the north side of our study area here. And so this is an area that shows, I think, an important thing as we're diving into this, that not all of these corridors is that straight red line like we were looking at in the first two. We have some areas where there's certain movements coming together that drive some of that severe congestion. And we sort of see two sections, basically from Oak Ridge Drive to Onville Road, then we sort of lighten up a little bit, and then really as we get into both the sort of commercial areas we have right there, as well as the close proximity of both 95 and Route 1, those two major north-south drivers, that's where we start to see a spike again in the future congestion. Okay, and then if we hop over to Mountain View Road, we get into another type. Truslow was one type of road, providing this sort of redundant east-west. Mountain View Road is a road that sees congestion for a somewhat similar reason, sort of being on the periphery of the main routes to 2050. It starts to see traffic around major intersections in what, again, is a more local, residential, formerly rural type of road. And so we see this short segment of congestion. And I'm zooming here so you can see some of the things in the area. But basically from Stepanigo Road to Shelton Shop, you see a level of severe congestion in the westbound, northwestbound direction. And in the eastbound, we really don't see throughout this corridor severe congestion. And so it's really about that sort of movement around to the west, sort of more on the periphery of the heart of activity that we see in some of our corridors we're just looking at, like Garrisonville Road.
Taking into consideration the projections, are they taking into consideration planned land use changes, or is it, okay, so it is the whole thing? Okay.
Exactly, and one of the things that we'll talk about is there's a way to sort of look at what the model is doing and also think about the land use vision that folks have and how that might create more network effects to help deal with the sort of funneling of traffic along only the major roadways. But yes, this is based on the 2050 land use projections. So a road that a lot of folks know quite well. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Joe, it's the default land use. I know that there are a number of other land use scenarios that the model, this is just the default land use that's the sort of projected base.
Yeah, so there are ways we could dive into greater detail about land use scenarios, as Nat is saying. That's Nat Greer from our team, who's really led the modeling work and is just joining us from afar today. And so that, that is a thing. That is an element of thinking through the land use and the future land use that communities want to create and what the roadway network that best supports that is about that. Route 3, a corridor that folks know quite well, I think. And really within Route 3, there's been a lot of study. We've been engaged with pipeline studies. Like the area that really pops out within this study, within this 2050, is looking from Salem Church to Bragg. So really on the west side of that Central Park area, really moving westward from the cities. And then that's an area where, again, there are gradations. Even though we're seeing red, where we spike up in that maximum BC, before we were talking about 1.75s, 1.8s, this is a place where we're talking about 1.03, not 0.97, so hitting stats, but not quite as severely. And we also know this is an area, as we'll talk about more, where there's very complicated traffic operations, and therefore that influences how much we can do here to try to bring those numbers down to reduce congestion. Right along here. Enon is another road, sort of like Truslow, that's showing sort of this east-west workaround. Enon up here is providing useful connections from the west side and the residential neighborhoods over here, over to Route 1 and then over to the on-ramp that Centerport provides onto 95. And the nature of the circulation is such that people have to go here and there. So again, like what we were just looking at, it gets congested, but not as severely as some other routes. And as we'll talk about, it's an interesting place where that north-south traffic affects east-west mobility. One of the reasons for this study, that Ian was very invested and interested in, was advancing the study of east-west, so we could focus on east-west because so many of the conversations in this region are in north-south. As we'll talk about, we can't always escape the impacts of the north-south traffic on the east-west performance, and that's something that you'll see in some of the proposals we look at of how we try to balance east-west mobility against the tug that north-south traffic is having on overall operations. Then we'll shift back down here. So then in Cowan Boulevard, so, connecting the city, the Central Park area. This is an area where we see some severe congestion near to the hospital, and then in the Central Park area in segments. It's not in the greatest quality there, but we have basically segments of red, and then in the middle, really actually interestingly around 95, we see a little better operations. And there again, we're just barely, remember 0.89, 0.82, those are about our threshold. So really, in most of this, we're just at the threshold. And that goes to a point of, is this a place we would invest versus, other locations that might be more severe? And so we'll keep moving through those and get to the fun part, which is what do we do about it? And so then Mills Drive is another area that was identified in phase 1 that's somewhat like Mountain View, a specific area where on the edge we have traffic coming together to create a discrete section of congestion. So you can see here from Virginia 608 to Benchmark Road, so in the vicinity of the Spotsylvania Station, we see some congestion really both in the westbound and the eastbound, but the eastbound, as you can probably just make out on the map, as a larger section. Then one of the things that we did during our period of validation of the model is that there's if folks have worked on model work, they know there's a lot of iteration, validation to get it there. And what we found is that Butler Road in the phase 1 study had not really captured all of the capacity that's there. And so what we were able to find is that the congestion that was seen in phase 1 for Butler Road, we don't actually expect that to materialize in 2050, and that this should remain under the severe threshold. So this is just outside of downtown Fredericksburg, and we were seeing initially some congestion in the vicinity of this neighborhood, but that turned out not to really be capturing all of the roadway capacity. So we won't talk any more about Butler Road today. He's on your mind. You don't have to worry about it.
The end of that.
So Fall Hill Avenue avenue is similar to what we were seeing below with Callan, though with a bit of the longer edge, that really it's on either end, and really our focus here on the east end coming towards Route 1, where we see the section of congestion. And so we see, and generally the sections that we see are on that lower bound of that, congestion threshold. And then let me pull up here, Raymond Church Road, which is another one of these roads that on the periphery of activity of growth are seeing, some more congestion. In 2050, the traffic seeks to fill out the network that's there. And you can see there's a relatively long section on Rameth Church coming around here, coming from Route 1 and Courthouse Road, connecting all the way, and the map wouldn't go all the way because of road work. So all the way from Route 1 to Courthouse, seeing this prolonged section of congestion in the westbound direction, much more modest in the eastbound direction, not continuing the whole way. Then the last one, having worked our way through it, setting ourselves up well for what we need to do next, which is figure out how to deal with these challenges, is Courthouse Road, which is another area that's a pretty wide arterial today, and it's just hitting that threshold. In the westbound, its average is below that 0.82. In the eastbound, you can see these segments of congestion, and really around this cluster between 95 and Route 1, around levels, is where we start to see some of these areas of congestion as different traffic comes together in an area, as you can see here, that has lots of different industrial and commercial, auto-centric commercial uses. Okay, so what do we see overall from that picture? That basically we see a lot of roads that are approaching that one, where things really get terrible, and a lot of roads that have crossed that 0.8 threshold, and then a few places like Courthouse, like Warrenton, where that VC ratio really gets substantially higher above 1. And so where is this all happening? What seems to be driving this in the model? A couple of key findings to then orient our strategies. So congestion is often highest where we have two things coming together. Type of auto-oriented commercial activity that's creating a lot of trips going a lot of different directions, and really abutting I-95 Route 1 movements. So we have a lot of regional access hitting against what's trying to happen in terms of local mobility. And so that is sort of clustering together in pretty tight space. And we know from other work we've done that has posed a lot of challenges, not just in this model, but when we actually try to do traffic simulation in the detailed way to actually move this traffic around. And that a lot that we'll talk about of this east-west traffic, because of that relationship of what's happening at 95 Route 1, the north-south traffic that we thought we were putting aside for this study is actually playing a meaningful role in how this east-west traffic is operating. So what we can do to the north-south will play a role, we think, in how we manage the east-west over time. And in addition to some of the strategies we'll propose here, and included in some of them, we have a lot of congestion in roads that are already pretty wide. These are roads we've already invested in this region in making larger to try to handle more activity and capacity. So some of the things that you start to think about are what can we do in terms of parallel routes? What can we do in terms of access management to think about that future land use condition and how these trips really get handled throughout the network? How we can develop a larger grid of streets to help cycle the traffic. If traffic works like water, and it sometimes does, can we give the water the different brooks and streams to work through? And then, are there other approaches, other than just widening that help to preserve capacity? So we're going to look at some widening options and also look at some strategies that try to build out these other approaches in looking at how to address the east-west congestion. I don't know, Chris, if there's anything else you'd add? Or,
No, other than to open it up the floor for any comments or questions regarding the findings before we jump into the proposed project.
Well, I've just got a thought here. I mean, just thinking from VRE's access to stations perspective, I think these findings kind of, to me, pose an existential threat to success of our service, because most of our customers today and likely in the future come from the western side of 95. And so when the travel time degrades from those, you know, in the AM to our access, I mean, you talk about solving the north-south. If people are finding that, well, it's too arduous to get across the county to get on the train, then they're not going to, you know, they're not going to get on the train, and they might be on 95, which makes the east-west even worse. So, and then also interesting to see that 17 down by Spotsylvania, just that one segment is going to be, you know, potentially severely congested. I wouldn't have expected that, but it does make sense because you're necking everything down to that one railroad crossing. So
we are hopeful that VRE will send us a letter of support for the new BRT life route that we're planning to help get people to your train station.
First time hearing about this.
In the transit study report, which we looked at last time, we talked about that route. So you just, when you were talking there about the difficulty accessing your train stations, I was like, yeah, we need to get them to send us a letter of support.
Make a note of that.
All right. Well, we'll keep, I think people are anxiously waiting, what are we going to do about it? So we can dive into that.
We can ask Stephen for a $300 million check. That's what we can do about it.
Well, Stephen's looking for that under Ian's couch cushions. We will talk about building on what we were just explaining with the key finding. What we then dove into, which was also building on what Chris was talking about, is, well, how do we go from the 13 corridors to projects? And there's a lot of words here, so we'll get to the highlights of the point. Can we do technically straightforward widenings? So these widenings are based on our experience. They are relatively easy in terms of getting the job done. They're not trying to foist more lanes in a place where the signal capacity is really going to prevent us from getting a lot of benefits out of that widening. Are there places where parallel routes might do the job? We have a road that hasn't been yet so widened. We can take advantage of that, and we can create capacity maybe onto 95 or maybe in other directions to help to spread the traffic around. And that sort of builds on the 3 new connections and junctions, and we'll talk about some new connections that have been, you know, sort of, you know, big topics, I think, throughout the region. And then we'll sort of more qualitatively, in terms of the language and information we provide, identify what other strategies need to be part of the picture. We'll talk about a couple examples there, but really where it's not just about the big dollar project, but also how land use and traffic planning can be a part of the strategies. When we're sort of here, 3 into 4, 5 and 6 are sort of what are coming next. Identify prioritization, informed by this group, others, and then documenting what other analysis. You know, this is a big sort of coarse way of looking throughout the region of where we're seeing the big congestion. There's more to be done to get, you know, in the nitty-gritty from an engineering, from a traffic operations perspective, to confirm, you know, the particular approaches. And so, just some caveats about the proposed corridor projects that we'll go through. These are draft proposals. These are, you know, ideas that VHB, we developed based on our experience, based on our review of the region's plans, but they really come from sort of our proposition to be, you know, put forward, engaged with here. There's more work that would need to be done to figure out, are these good ideas beyond they seem to have some traffic benefit. You know, that goes with the stakeholders, that goes with traffic operations. And so we'll talk about a few of the big items, and one of them is looking at new I-95 crossings and interchanges, as well as we'll talk about you know, connections across the Rappahannock. And so we have this slide here that goes through the individual projects, and I'll talk about them specifically. There's a few regional projects, we're calling them, 4, where we think different routes can benefit from a cluster of projects. So if we're thinking about 13 or 12, because we don't have to care about Butler Road anymore, you know, there are about 4 projects that we think can have potential benefit across different corridors. And so those shared corridors, those regional, are looking at extension of Centerport Parkway between Rameth Church and Courthouse. We'll show this more on a map in a moment. A new Rappahannock connection, combined with potentially or separate from an I-95 interchange near the Virginia Welcome Center, a new I-95 interchange on Harrison Road, and also a project that's a little smaller in comparison to some of these three big regional projects, but widening of Fall Hill Avenue and connecting to Mary Washington Road in the vicinity of the hospital, also a project that a couple of different corridors benefit from, why it gets on this regional list.
Before you move on, just a question, is there any significance to A, B, C, and D? Is it just in any particular order? Because I noticed on some slides later on, you also have A, B, C, and D, and I was wondering whether there's any significance or is it just random numbers?
It is in the order in which, if you read this table in the slides, that they emerge.
So they're no particular importance.
It's not a prioritization. We haven't gotten to prioritization. It is we're trying to keep the logic of this table in this presentation.
Great.
And so just to put on the map there, and of course this little, I'm going to go in there. So that's our connection up Centerport, continuing that. It's really sort of your north-south, west side bypass starting to come together. Then we have this combination, something over going across the river. These dash lines are the height of dash lines, extremely there is a connection here. No statement about where, exactly precisely what roadway, but just trying to test. We have some capacity generally in that location. What does it start to look like?
I just have to say for the record, I tried really hard to make this an east-west mobility study, but looking at that map, you know, I tried, that's all I have to say.
Well, the river curves. And then the interchange location, this is what we were talking about with Fall Hill, and then we have Harrison Road where it's cutting across, and then we look at, you know, Route 3 and some of our other roads we were talking about to the south where Harrison comes together. So now these are key findings about these big picture ones. We'll talk through the different specific items. Someone want to jump in?
Hello? Loving the music. Can you mute your mic, please?
So of those big ones, which we recognize are big projects, and we'll talk about why they pop up, notwithstanding their size, notwithstanding the policy and political conversations that need to happen. But what of those big projects, what are we seeing? So of the two new 95 interchanges that we're looking at, the modeling suggests that the one near Virginia Welcome Center toward the north performs better than Harrison Road. That in large part has to do with, again, the sort of northbound flows and the sort of push of traffic overall within the model, but we do see, as we'll talk about more, some benefits, and some benefits particularly out of a larger vision of how the sort of traffic and land use of this area might evolve in the Harrison Road interchange. And so one of the things we'll show is we show a series of places where we build out the network of roads, and those do have some positive localized impact. But a lot of the things we're seeing in the model, which may not be wholly everything what we see in real life, but what we see in the model is that the network, particularly of new north-south streets, it's just not just a little stream. It's becoming this big brook and really attracting a lot of traffic, meaning our sort of overall benefits are, you know, not huge. We're seeing some east-west benefits, but we're seeing just so much north-south demand that it's continuing to have some challenges in getting our east-west mobility. We'll talk about that more. Some of the straightforward widenings of the simplest corridors we've been looking at, those, you know, perform very well in the modeling. They have localized benefits. They aren't these big regional projects, but certainly in these locations the phase one study identified, we see the widening doing what it's supposed to. And then we've sort of made this caveat a few times, so I think I'll dive into the corridors. So Courthouse Road on the Stafford side, hopefully I can go back to Google Maps if people want, but maybe we're situated now. So we basically have been looking at two things here. Go back to that table. Looking at that north-south bypass, also looking at widening the existing 4-lane section to 6 lanes. And so what do we see? What we see is that the addition of Centerport and that new access, and if folks know exactly how Centerport's laid out, you'll see that this schematic isn't exactly it, and that's just a matter of the modeling. And all of this, that red is what we're trying to get to. So this Centerport Parkway comes in, and in the eastbound direction, courthouse, we address that latent congestion problem, but Centerport does pick up a lot of traffic. It's not, a spring chicken in terms of the traffic that it's handling. So that's something to better understand through more analysis of how, in future study of how Centerport can be made to operate because of that east-west benefit it has. And we just ran this model run, why it's another color in approach, and in the final report we'll have this all squared up. But basically with the widening, whereas here we saw the east-west benefit, the eastbound benefit, with the widening we see the westbound benefit. So we see that sort of the different goals of the different traffic. Don't have a detailed answer of why that is quite yet, but we do see that each of these projects is helping with either direction. So when we get over to Warrenton Road, and similarly, what we're doing with these two weeks were some of the worst congested. Okay, what's the thing we do locally? What's the bigger thing we do so as not to just sort of continually come back? The 2070 version of this is now we're going to 12, 14, 16 lanes. What are some of the things we can do to create a better network?
Alex is looking forward to building those 16.
I should have a cash register ringing in my head.
This will have to build up. So we're looking, we've got the big picture one. So the New River crossing along with I-95. And then in here we have some right turn lanes that we can convert to throughs, get ourselves some more capacity so we have 4 lanes in each direction. And so what we see here is that the new crossing interchange brought together reduces congestion in a few segments I'll show by basically 20 to 30%. So some of the more meaningful reductions that we see throughout the process. And then as we'll show, it's in these segments along the corridor. When we talk about the converting lane to the through, we also see a pretty decent pickup as well, 20 to 25% reduction in localized congestion, but localized is the key word there. Very focused on the places where the sort of lack of capacity and because of the through wasn't getting us enough through that intersection or through that area versus something that's a little more regional in its benefit. So let's walk through how those different ones come together. So I'll actually start with the interchange because you'll see this a couple of times and I'll explain it here, and I recognize it's a bit of a mess, so we'll take a moment with it. So this is the no-build. We have the big gap over on the west side here. And what we looked at, we actually evaluated both with the two things together, a connection across, and again, this is not design, this is representational of going from over here to over there. Getting that connection across and then getting the interchange too. And you can, we do follow Celebrate Virginia to sort of have a route and to have trips that we're building off of. I know there was some discussion about whether that's an appropriate connection earlier. We welcome all of that sort of feedback.
With your white block from here, which is I'm the furthest probably from the screen, it's difficult to see whether there's an improvement on US 17 or not because of the white color just makes it hard to see.
Yeah, we'll definitely work on the representation here, but the story is if we start over in the far left, you can see a lot of red in this section.
Yeah.
And then when we're over here, you've got this all the way, this is Berea Church, Plantation, all the way through, right until we get up into just the, mess around 95. We're seeing that reduction in congestion, and we'll talk about some other places where we can give a little highlight. Fall Hill that moves basically from on the verge of severe and severe, basically becomes free flow to less than severe throughout its corridor. We'll talk about that more. But yeah, Warrenton sees a relatively large segment until we get into the morass around 95, improve in its operations.
Like you got 500 million lying anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understand correctly. Where does the road, where would the new interchange, what road would it connect to on the west side of I-95?
Yes, so we're calling it, this would be in the Shelton Boulevard in the ballpark area, and then connect right by the, where the Welcome Center is. So that sort of network of roads.
Gordon Shelton Boulevard, isn't it?
Yeah. So those sort of network of roads that are coming together on the north end of the Central Park area where the ballpark and the new apartment development is.
Gordon Shelton Boulevard, sorry to interrupt,
yes.
It's a bit of local knowledge, Stephen and others can bear me out, but Gordon Shelton Boulevard was designed pointing right at the I-95, and I think there was always a hope that it might one day connect. So that's where presumably they're suggesting to build the connection now.
Well, what's on the other side of I-95 then?
On the east side?
On the east side?
Well, I guess the Celebrate side. Would it hook into the Celebrate Parkway?
Gordon Shelton Boulevard is the road it would connect to on the western side.
So, yeah, so with this...
Gordon Shelton Boulevard. It's the one that runs dead. It doesn't go anywhere. It goes past the Celebrate Virginia and then ends just in the middle of nowhere. The Celebrate Virginia folks had designed an on-ramp or got a consultant to design an on-ramp or whatever back in the day, and it was just never built. So it's the one that's parallel to, Caldy Silver Parkway become when it goes across Fall Hill? Does it carry on being called?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's parallel to Caldy Silver Parkway. It's the one that's parallel to it. It ends now, it doesn't go anywhere, it stops.
Was that helpful? There are other questions?
Oh, I got it covered. Okay. Well, once you finish, you did a lot of effort to get here. So.
Okay. Sure. And yeah, we'll bring this up as, you know, one of these, the regional projects. There'll be something that we'll come to. But let's also look.
Oh, wait. Oh, I thought you were going to play with the Google Maps. Okay. So a couple questions about this one just real quick. So you've looked at the congestion on Warrenton, okay? Clearly that's got a benefit.
Yeah.
Look at all that red now down in the city of Fredericksburg. So what are we doing about that? I mean, this just seems to kind of put one problem in a different jurisdiction. I'm not quite sure I understand.
Sure. So one of the, so I think there's a two layers on, and Chris, you might have some thoughts there. So one is there's always a challenge of, you know, sort of chasing the traffic. Right, it's sort of a broad problem in how we deal with congestion. It sort of raises non-widening strategies as being part of the problem. It's part of why we have a transit component to this. It's part of why policies around parking, around land use matter for what happens.
Before you carry on, hang on.
Yeah.
Just to simplify your question, he is saying on the map that Cowan Boulevard and Fall Hill reduce their congestion if you build that bridge. And if you build that on-ramp. You are saying, Mike, that there is still remaining congestion, or you're saying there's new congestion?
Yeah, I'm looking at no build scenario.
Yeah.
And a lot of red appearing on the new crossing and the new crossing close-up maps. That's it. But I do appreciate you pointing out that Fall Hill and Cowan have some benefit, though, going back to your earlier point. I think we're pretty low priority in terms of fixing congestion. I think there's a very big concern about pushing congestion into the city. And the only reason I'm even bringing it up, I mean, you know, we need to have a good regional road network. This river crossing has a lot of potential issues with it. I'm not saying that it's not warranted by traffic data or that it's not a good thing eventually in the long term, but you're contradicting a very recent land use plan that we've come up with, which prioritized preservation of that entire area of the river. The city has easements that are dedicated to preservation from you know, the I-95 crossing like 40 miles west. It's a big deal. So I think that, you know, we'd like to know more about, you know, what exactly we're showing that's bright red kind of in the area, or if you ran a model where you had the interstate interchange and not the crossing, you know, what the colors show up in that.
I've already asked for that.
Yes. And
because that's the question that I immediately had. I saw this for the first time last week. Tuesday or something. I had no idea that they were going to propose this crossing.
Sure.
When I saw it, I said, please, can you separate those two things out? And they do have those models, but just one comment on that easement. It's specifically, the city manager sent me that easement after this, and it specifically says right up front in the beginning, including allowing future bridge crossings.
Sure.
So it doesn't exclude this possibility.
Right. But it is a lot of consideration, and the purpose of that easement is environmental protection, and it's a scenic road designation there as well. So there's just a lot to unpack with showing that, and just want to make sure that we're having this dialogue here.
It's a new proposal that, like, I just saw on, I think it was Wednesday last week, so I'm also still.
Well, I think the other thing here, Chris, you know, this study is predicated on probably like the equivalent of streetlight data. You know, it is showing where cars are going and then where they're coming out, which is going to make something like this look good. And again, I'm trying to be value neutral on this, because this very well may be a solution that's needed for the region. I don't know. I'm trying not to play value judgment. But I think what I would like to know more about what you factored in outside of that raw traffic data. What are you guys looking at, and or are you looking at, you know, this would have an effect on future land use in those areas, and are we looking at like some kind of increased land use in this area? I mean, now you're looking at a ton more traffic coming out of South Stafford. Now you're looking at a ton of traffic in our areas, in the northern areas of the city, which again may be a good thing. I don't know. But how does that work in the model? Is it working in the model? What do you think about that?
So again, I just want to maybe clarify what you're seeing, and when you say you're seeing now new congestion areas in the city, I don't think that's a case, and maybe it's just a matter of being able to dive in and see this a little bit more finitely, getting a little bit closer. Recognizing that the new roadway segment across the river, we don't know what that is yet. Right now, we're modeling a 4-lane roadway, and that's why you're seeing new congestion on a new roadway. But think of this as a new spoke into the city. So it's just providing access from one population center to another population center. We're trying to make those connections between generators. And this is one of those areas that we see the greatest potential for connecting those two generators, those on the north side of the river there, with those generators on the south, Carl D. Silver Parkway area, the area to the south, and of course the city of Fredericksburg, as well as the major generators in the city, the university, the hospital, et cetera. So that's the intent of this project here. As Drew was explaining, it's not the purpose of creating a second river crossing just for the sake of a second river crossing. It really is trying to connect those populations and those trips that want to make those trips that currently have to go up and around and down 95 and contributing to that congestion. So we shouldn't be adding any new congestion. We're just better facilitating those trips that want to get into the city via another route.
And might be taking traffic off of 17, Route 3, the portion of Route 3 around Central Park, the highway, plus Cowan and Fall Hill and some other streets.
I mean, I think that's kind of disingenuous. If you're going to build more road through a new area, you're just going to get more land use. So that's planning 101.
Well, except that in this particular space, where that section of, what do you call it, Area 1, small Area 1, that's all being designed and built now. It's not new build, it's not new construction. If you build a road further out from the city, then you encourage new growth, new build out there. But right here, they already, I mean, Mike could probably tell us more than I could, but there are plans to build on all of that vacant land.
I think the land use in the city is one question. Would this have a multiplier on the potential Celebrate Virginia South? Yeah, I think it would. And I think your answer, I think what I heard you say, and the answer to that question is no. Whatever is in the 2050 land use plan now is in both of these scenarios. There is no accommodation for whether or not this induces demand, and that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that that data point was out there. Yeah. I don't know that there's a tremendous multiplier from Celebrate Virginia South. Hey man, putting that interstate exit in there would be, it's an economic development driver for us, and that's kind of why it's in the plan. I think the more concern I've got is that it opens up a lot more of that area of Stafford. And I'm not well versed on Stafford's land use plan there, which would be more of a low density, auto-centric environment, I would think, just by kind of what's going on there. So that's, yeah. You know, we can't, in a model like this, you know, what do you do about something like that? I'm not sure. And Alex, man, jump in if I'm getting into Stafford territory here. I don't know if you guys have land use, already have planned this out in your land use and it might already be captured. That's just interesting for us to know. We don't want to solve one problem, sacrifice a major environmental recreational gem that we've got there that it provides a lot of benefit for people coming and visiting the city, just to shift the problem around. It's going to be a conversation we got to have, so.
Yeah, sorry, so the short answer is no, it's the same issues. Yes, exactly. But to Ian's point, that's the area of the old abandoned golf course.
Yes.
Which I think is already planned for build out. I think that's reflected in the land use model. Nat, I don't know if you're still on and can answer that question. So the idea is that, it wouldn't be inducing new trips that aren't already projected in the model for that area.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, we can look at it, you know, in the first pass when we do these planning studies, right, we sort of try to hold as many variables constant as possible. So in this case, yeah, it's the same land use, and what we're doing is looking at the changes to the model network. I think that as a future study for this, it would make a lot of sense to go back and revisit the land use assumptions and understand, is there capacity for additional development that might be induced by some, you know, this is a large, you know, impact roadway, right, in terms of the magnitude of mobility and accessibility. So it certainly makes a lot of sense to have a follow-up study that would look in more detail to say, well, are we at build out, you know, for the land use in that area, or are there other additional trips and additional density that could be induced by this facility?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. My question is, as we're doing a lot of the rebuilding, what about pedestrian crosswalk and ability for people like me who are in a wheelchair?
It's a very good question, and I think it goes to, well, this is obviously this will sort of carry us to some of the other items as well. One of the challenges in thinking about these east-west corridors is, and why we're looking at, this is a pretty big fill in the network. There are some places where we have some more modest fill in the network proposals, is that, you know, continuing to widen high activity corridors where we have commercial, you know, healthcare uses on either side of the street, continuing to widen those may be more challenging for folks who have mobility impairment to get across the street. And also overall hurt the economic vitality of those corridors as they just become about going through and not going to. And so the opportunity to think about, well, how can we avoid that 12, 14, 16 lane version of these major east-west corridors influences some of our thinking about, you know, how can we fill in elsewhere so we don't make it even more challenging. We'll talk more in this today as we have the time and, you know, throughout our study and in thinking about these corridors of pedestrian, whether you're walking or rolling impacts. And that's something where in our looking through these, when we've said, oh, widen this, we've also said, but you'll need to, at these particular locations, pay close attention to crossing times, to seeing how people can actually successfully access what they need to. So that's a really important question. It's one of the policy issues that's, you know, to the earlier discussion, is a major
I'm sorry to interrupt. Over by the Central Park area, just even yesterday, you have the dips where I can get onto a sidewalk or crosswalk, and I will ride all the way to the end, and there's no way for me to get off. And then I have to ride my wheelchair all the way back.
One of the things that I think I can fairly confidently say is that it's very unlikely that FAMPO would agree to a bridge over the river without putting a multi-use path for pedestrians, for bicycles, for wheelchairs, and everything else. In fact, if we ever got to the point of building such a bridge, I would want a little viewing point on the Don Bridge as well, the way that we've got one on the Chatham Bridge, because as Mike was saying earlier, it's a beautiful scenic area, and you could stand on the bridge and be able to see the river and see the trees and all of the natural phenomena.
Yeah, so question in the final recommendations, would this report potentially include the recommendation for a transit-only facility or a bike ped-only facility where one might be warranted? Like I'm thinking if the potential impacts for a, single occupant automobile bridge in this location wasn't, feasible for either the counties or, the prospective land use, is that an opportunity to recommend, well, okay, if you're looking at high capacity east-west transit corridors, maybe this becomes a transit facility. And you can somehow, capture trips that are coming from the western part or southern part of Stafford into the city, that way.
So you're asking if we can't build a bridge for cars, if we would build a bridge for buses and bikes?
Or, whatever transit is the most feasible or most realistic transit to build. But, I mean, would that be a potential recommendation? Like, would that be on the table, or would any crossing have to include at least SOV access?
For me, I don't think there's any option in a study that's off the table before we start the discussion, right? We don't exclude options before we start this discussion. I don't know whether our consultants have a view as to whether they would recommend that. That would be up to them to tell us whether they recommend that or not.
Yeah, it does appear that transit is missing. When we first started this, we were talking about a lot of transit east-west and missing large amounts of people, and I see nothing.
So, if you look on your agenda, there is an update on the whole transit report. And obviously this section of this presentation is specifically about roadways, not about transit. But it's not got into design yet. This is just trying to solve the traffic congestion on roadways particularly. But you guys feel free to comment.
Well, no, it's a good point. I think what something Chris and I have talked about a lot on the side is that, and we can talk through some more of these corridors and the types of the things we're seeing, though this is clearly a big item here, is that these corridors are reaching, in the pipeline study around Route 3, we found lots of challenges in trying to widen, manage, move operations, and there were some, very challenging pieces to get there. So you sort of are reaching these points where on the major east-west corridors that exist, your ability to widen and get benefits is limited. And so the sort of toolbox you have at your disposal, if you start on the roadway side, is again, to look at that network, look at the grid, which poses a variety of challenging policy problems. You have something big like this. You also have, we haven't yet modeled, but we will, widening truss flow, which is a pretty residential to rural sort of road where lots of folks whose cul-de-sacs end on it will have concerns about there. So you have widening elsewhere so as not to create these super boulevards. You have the ability to create the network in the grid, which isn't showing up so strongly in this model. There was some good, commentary about why that might be, but we know broadly through experience helps to distribute traffic, helps to overall reduce congestion. And then it's all of the non-auto strategies. And that is really tied in from even what we saw with the east-west high-capacity transit, the type of land use and the type of sort of penalty we have on people parking, on people driving, that pushes them to take the high-quality transit, whether that's to VRE or taking an express bus. It requires, all of it sort of coming together in a strategy that involves the counties, involves FAMPO, involves the commission thinking through that piece. So that's definitely one of the toolboxes. And it can help obviate, avoid certain investments, but it requires dedicated policy to make that transit viable, successful, investable, because, that east-west is really our first gambit on it. And, adding more, which would be great, I think we would definitely support, requires that overall holistic thinking about how do we drive transit as the viable option to pull, 10-15% of the trips off the network.
And in this region, when we're talking about transit, sorry, I'll come to both of you in a moment. When we're talking about transit in this region, we only have 3 transit operators. You, VRE, Fred, Transit, are not here today, I believe, and OmniRide. That's it. There's not these 100 transit operators. So if we talk about a transit bridge, it's where you, Fred, and OmniRide that we're going to sit down with and say, hey. And the question would then arise, is there sufficient need from VRE, Fred, and OmniRide to build a massive bridge only for transit, how many, Stephen will be kicking me under the table just now saying, how many buses an hour are you going to put across that bridge? And you're going to spend $400 million building the bridge. So it's a question of like need versus the reality of what we have available in the region as well.
Yeah, but I guess I would say then that would potentially start even higher level discussions, I would hope, of what's the role, you know, the three existing transit providers, myself included, you know, being one of them, does it make more sense to take a regional approach to transit? And that's something I know we've talked about in the past, what is the future goal for FAMPO, you know, and this body is, you know, if there are some major transit infrastructure that's proposed as part of this study, do the transit agencies have to change?
We have two major transit proposals already in this study.
Yeah.
To Lynch.
Great. So Adam, Friends of the Rappahannock. You know, always interested to see the proposals for new river crossings. I will say that if you're looking at different alternatives for river crossings, a crossing that occurs between two already urbanized areas, both of them are urban service areas, is probably the less impactful way to cross the river than if you run something way west where you're going from green space to green space, and that unlocks the possibility of more conversion of open spaces. I think, though, that the symbology of this map is not showing some of the auxiliary impacts, so having a new 95 interchange there, and maybe having a new river crossing there as well. Like, the bar is so low for red on this map that going from like 0.8 to 1.5 is all in the red zone. Mm-hmm. So you're not like, there could be lots of changes happening that we're not seeing. So something in maybe the next draft that shows like they're purple that really is the extreme congestion would be helpful, I think, for us.
I've also asked them to separate out the I-95 interchange impacts from the bridge interchange impacts, because we might not want to do both. We might want to do one of those two. We might want to do both. I don't know. You know, I don't have the checkbook, so yeah.
Just kind of piggyback on Mike's comment in the city with Spotsylvania County, because I look at a crossing, obviously I'm looking at Route 3 as well, and all these roads interconnect. My question is this, whether we have a really good sense of how much of that traffic on 17, bottlenecking 17, I-95 is coming from far outside the region, point west and points northwest. And what I mean by that is 17 to me, and I for one use 17 oftentimes to try to avoid DC traffic, and then you take this funnel around through 17, and it strikes me as a freight truck traffic and travelers route from points west to northwest, Winchester, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Ontario, Canada, because you can see the place. And in that case, how much of this traffic is only coming into the region because it's funneling to 95. And 95 is the goal. Avoiding DC is the goal. To hit 95 just to go further south down 95 to the Carolinas or Florida or somewhere else, Virginia Beach. And I guess my concern there is if we make it a diversion off of 17 south, does that just reroute that traffic through apps and whatever to a new interchange, to Route 3? People just don't care. They're not necessarily going to Fredericksburg, they're going to 95. And it's the new path of least resistance that'll just fill up and then blow out Route 3 or a new interchange somewhere else. So I guess it's my question is how much of that traffic is out of state, out of region, and going out of state, out of region, just passing through?
So I think, you know, and there's a couple of different ways to get at this. The way basically the model has a boundary, you know, in terms of the data that's here. There are other ways to look at, you know, it gets pricey to look all the way to the Canadian border. Right. But to, you know, think about it.
I understand that, but the reality is that volume builds.
Right, but to sort of look at, say, okay, 281, you know, to 301. Yeah, exactly. To sort of a larger regional outset. You know, there are ways to look at origin and destination data. I would say that something in this model that is true is that some of, you know, we as professionals see, and if we'll just Since, for example, on Garrisonville Road, we look at as a local opportunity, a connection that doesn't provide a new interchange, but provides some new east-west connector of some of the different activity. We see network improvements like this. We know that those are going to provide benefits in terms of overall circulation. Some of them, like the Centerport Parkway extension, in different areas, I'm just flipping through, that's not great, but some of them basically see this big pickup in red. And that, I think, is because the model is showing a lot of that interregional trips. Now, we know this area has a very high proportion of people who live here and work outside, much higher than a lot of other regions, and so that gets intermingled into it too. So we do know north-south trips that are regional in nature are driving a lot of this, even when we try to solve for the local. How far they're going, this model isn't robust to tell us that.
So part of my response to your question is that the intent of this river crossing is not to serve as a parallel to 95. It really is to connect these population centers and these major generators.
Local people.
Local people. And so when it comes down to it, the design of that facility would then have some play on whether or not those truck traffic, the trips from Canada would divert to a new facility.
And I think that's key.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not trying to build another high-speed, limited access facility.
But really, there's a strong potential. What you would do is make a very easy shortcut, so people coming down from Warrenton, from Winchester, all that way, would just have bypass all that and just make a shortcut. That's all you're doing, basically.
So that was my answer to him, which is what the design of that facility would be geared toward the local traffic, a boulevard-style facility, as opposed to something like Route 17 is today, which is a high-speed facility. And so this would not be a shortcut for those long haulers. This is connecting the local population on the north side of the river down to Route 3 and to the city of Fredericksburg. So in reality, it's not a shortcut because what it would be doing is dumping you into the Carl D. Silver Parkway area. Well, unless we were to make that connection to I-95. And in that case, it's really not helpful either unless there's a crash on that one segment of 95. So to say that nobody would ever divert would be disingenuous.
But Route 3 is already congested.
And it's already congested, exactly. So it's not a viable alternative.
To get off US 17 and get on Route 3, you're not saving yourself anything. You're going to get stuck back in the traffic again.
Right. And you're traveling on a facility that would be calm for local traffic, not a high-speed corridor.
When it comes to, I don't know if anyone just thought about this perspective. This time next year, there'll be 24 lanes crossing Rappahannock River between Fredericksburg and Stafford County. There are no lanes, by the way, crossing from Stafford to Spotsylvania. These are all within city limits. 24 lanes. 12 of them will be right at 95. And the other 12 are split on the other 3 bridges. So there's going to be a lot of capacity to cross the river. So yeah, you would almost certainly want, if you did anything different in this area, you would want it to have a different flavor. When Silver Companies originally proposed to Celebrate Virginia North and South, they planned to have a gondola in this location. And it actually makes more sense now with the redevelopment on the Stafford side than it did when it was golf course. That might be a type of a transit consideration.
I am working on a gondola. So.
Dying for VDOT letter of support for the gondola.
But very important point Stephen brought up. Are you guys in this model including all of the most recent 95 projects in your capacity analysis? Because that's a great point. There's a lot of capacity being built currently right now.
Yeah. Yes.
That's in there. Okay.
And the idea is that the local traffic then doesn't get on 95, which means 95 is that much more attractive to the long distance.
Well, that's also the theory of the collector-distributor lanes, though. I mean, and that we are building right now for hundreds of millions of dollars.
So the traffic that you're trying to ease is not the I-95. You're trying to ease the traffic on
Route 3,
US 17, Route 3, Cowan Boulevard, Fall Hill Avenue, etc. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about a couple of different flavors of the types of things we're looking at. This is, a big one. and it raised all of the policy issues that folks are discussing are, fundamental, big picture items that getting both that high level and that granular direction on is critical, because what our sort of high level thesis is the east-west, they're facing a lot of challenges, and they force a response in terms of the host of conservation, traffic management, planning, mode shift questions that folks are raising. So we can look at what some of the other east-west places are seeing and what types of solutions pop out, and we'll welcome region's feedback. So Trustlow, we haven't modeled anything just yet. This is something where we have some decent operations in the eastbound direction. The westbound gets more congested, but it's not too close. Again, more residential, more rural. Something that could be widened and then maybe relieve some off Warrenton as part of a sort of more localized network of a little more capacity. But something we're waiting to see how the rest of the projects come out. So that'd be something we do in the next couple of weeks here. So a couple of places where we did look, at a couple of different options. So Garrisonville Road looks at maybe two approaches: the widening strategy, a section where we're not all the way to 8 lanes, and then also a little more creating a bit of a grid. And so within the model, we evaluated what's called a centroid connector, which means this isn't exactly a road in this place, because there's everywhere you look to put a road, there's some challenges you need to think through. But if we can get that access across, again, to that local point, this is about trying to bifurcate the regional travel from the local folks and thinking about how we can build out better access, to the economic development area here. And so we look at going across 95 without providing interchange. And basically, we see in the areas right around 95, we see about 10% reduction in congestion from, adding something in like that. And again, there's some graphic improvements to make to everyone's point. When we look at the widening, if we go back to where we were, basically what the sort of widening out in the western section does is it clears out this red into creating a consistent orange section all the way to Shelton Shop until we get into Mine and the congestion approaching 95. So this being, the ability there, again, to sort of posit these two types of strategies. Do we look at further widening the main line, which has pros and cons and some limits based on what traffic operations can actually handle? Or do we look at some strategies around, is there a network that we can build that tries to pull things off of the main line in other locations? Mountain View is sort of a good sample of what happens when you take, one of these roads on the periphery that has a very particular things come together. You add some simple widening. And, here we still see a little bit, and I think this goes to the question about exactly how we show the red versus the pink. We see improvements along the way. There's still demand, and you sort of have this cluster of connections, but with a little bit of widening in that northwestbound direction, and we're able to solve a good portion of the congestion. And then Route 3, right? We talked about how Route 3, this is a very challenging area. A big pipeline study we've been working on is, just a lot of challenges in trying to add capacity or make things flow better in this section. So we wanted to look at, this parallel route, which looked at the Harrison Road interchange. And so basically what we saw there is that pretty modest, basically 1 to 2% improvements in congestion in the section of Route 3 when we brought in the Harrison Road interchange. And so now it still helps us give east-west, it gives choices to users. It obviously brings more traffic, onto Harrison Road with the attendant increase in congestion in certain segments, particularly with the ramp interactions there. So we're testing that, parallel route grid. It's not showing like gangbusters in the model, but is the sort of thing that would say knowing there's pretty limited things we can do on Route 3, well, here and then the stuff we were talking to the north are some of our options. And do we think that modest gains in the model, but logic of, building out a network makes sense to us.
I have a question about this one. This Harrison Road interchange, would this, in respect to the Route 3 study, would this be a recommendation to replace those improvements on the corridor study for Route 3, or is it in combination with? I know there have been talk about a grade-separated intersection improvement at Carl D. Silver leading to the mall. Is that in addition to, or how does that work?
So I think, Chris, that this includes those sorts of.
Yeah, and we addressed specifically that crossing of Route 3 in the pedestrian bike projects.
Yeah.
We'll get to in a little bit. Prioritizing the crossing there at Carl D. Silver Parkway.
One of the reasons we decided to choose VHB as the consultants for this east-west study is simply because they were involved in the pipeline studies, and there's some overlap. And it makes a lot of sense to have the same set of minds looking at the network, because otherwise you get one consultant saying, go here, and another consultant saying, go there, then you have a fight between your two consultants that you're managing, whereas we brought it in-house here. I mean, obviously there were other considerations, but one of the things was that the same people are working on both studies, and so we hopefully won't get conflicting recommendations.
Okay, so I'll go back to our transportation staff and let them know on that. And the only other thing is, I know with the bike path improvements, which is further on, there were some real basic just constraints that were identified, just initial gut reaction. Is that something that you have for these projects as well, some of the initial constraints that you've identified?
Yeah, and that's something where we'll document it more in the report, but just sort of intellectually and looking through the corridor. Again, the other push on, do we just keep widening the main line? And I know I sound like a broken record, but that's really the fundamental policy question we're considering. And this is an area, too, where the difference between this high-level modeling, where does traffic want to flow, and then more detailed micro simulation, mesoscale simulation of, creating network, different land use scenarios. Does Harrison Road help all of this operate better? Sort of more and additional tools can help us answer that question. I want to make sure we have time for bike and pedestrian pieces as well. So I'll just sort of highlight here, and folks will send out, this is slightly modified, just to allow discussion on these points, and there's some good follow-ups that we can circle up on and coordinate with Ian on next steps. But Enon is another location where we have a lot going on. Centerport performing poorly. Enon, and this is coded as Mountain View, but it's all Enon over here. That sort of loop around, which there's a project to modify. Just a lot of bad sort of circulation paths here, contributing to some challenging congestion. So we look at, what can we do? And you see here that we're able to create a little bit of connection. It doesn't solve all of our red. We see some areas, particularly as Centerport comes into Route 1, see some improvements. We see some improvements in Eastbound Enon. An area where we think, again, building out the network, that's in a north-south direction. It gives some more choice and, some more movement. Now, this is not necessarily the easiest. It's an easy intersection to draw. There'd be a lot to think about how this would actually come together here. But this is a place where we do see some improvements to localized, network filling out.
Sure, I think it would be helpful to switch over your map.
Oh, sure.
To see it.
Yeah, just particularly to highlight some of those, geometry there. So here we have Enon, and just basically looking in this point here. There's also, there's environmental impacts associated with this, certainly. That's a serious consideration. You can see the green there. But in terms of then connecting with that larger conversation about Centerport Parkway as a potential north-south, west side bypass, and exactly how that would filter its way through, not the purpose of this study per se, but to just sort of put out here and say, okay, if we're starting to fill this in Centerport Parkway more, do we start to see some localized benefits and more regional benefits?
We have a member of CTUC who proposed a roadway in that sort of vicinity recently.
I think it was, and I think he was looking at.
I think the comp plan, Becky, do you know if the comp plan, actually Alex is here, there was some discussion of.
Yeah, I think it talks a little bit about that, having that connector there from Centerport to Enon.
Sort of a future idea kind of thing.
And Drew, you might just want to zoom in down there at the south end where there's that little gap.
Yeah, there's a little bit of connect, commerce to Salt Lake, Virginia, where maybe that then gives you a decent amount of north-south bypass on the west side.
Again, a major collector for the west side of 95, not as a parallel, not as an alternative to 95 for the cut-through traffic, the long-haul traffic, but for the locals on the west side to alleviate the east-west links.
We're going to run out of time, so I think we should, if we can, move just quickly through these last few slides.
I'm just coming here, I think maybe the way to summarize it, folks have a particular corridor they want to understand. I think I'll talk to courthouse, as an element.
We'll show more. We're looking at how the Harrison Road interchange can help here too. But this sort of also gives an example of another bucket of a type of corridor. This section here is very industrial. It's like a million little light industrial items here. And then this has your sort of standard auto-oriented retail. And we're not, we have these little segments. So can we think about, in addition to whatever might be proposed on Courthouse and what Harrison might do, thinking about how the sort of future planning of industrial, which is going to continue to be a major economic driver in geographies like the Fredericksburg area, that can be coordinated.
The new VA clinic, the new Veteran Affairs clinic is in that vicinity too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, correct.
So it's going to drive, they claim 3,000 new jobs right there where that red is in your box.
Which red?
The top.
East side or the west side?
The east side red there. 3,000 additional jobs over some time, maybe 10 years, I don't know.
Yeah, and so we see this as pretty localized as a combination of, yes, you can do, there's some potential left turn capacity there, but really thinking about the interaction of the types of activities on this section and seeing how Harrison Road helps address it.
We do have a complementary road in our comp plan, and we're actually pursuing part of it with private development potentially. There's Seven Rolling Drive to Harrison Road. Just connection.
Yeah.
Been our comp plan for a while, and it's starting to get a little bit of traction.
Good.
And so that's sort of the bucket of things we've looked at. Big regional questions, trying to fill in a network, whether that's with the north, whether that's with east-west. Some places where a widening on a straightforward stretch or on a more complicated stretch, but seems to have localized benefits. And then all the host of policy questions about how you might make those more successful, how you might use transportation demand management strategies to make the most congested places work well, how transit and everything else can play a role. And I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback. We'll provide this so we can get more. We also want to talk about the other piece of this that, is the pedestrian bicycle connection work that we've also been advancing. I think I'll pass over to my colleague.
Before we do, can we skip down to the transit only because that topic came up and I want to make sure that we respond to that. An update on the transit, and that'll dovetail into the pet bike.
Yeah, I'm going to need to advance the slides, I realize. The story there on transit, what we've been working on is trying to identify a set of potential strategies on the Route 3 section. There was an area of question and concern about traffic operations, VDOT's long-term plans and short-term plans on Route 3, and what can be accommodated. So we've been evaluating things like center running operation, looking at different alignments to the corridor and seeing what can or can't be accommodated. We'll update the the transit report on that front. But we basically think we're in a good position in either case to offer still a very successful east-west transit option, and then the sort of refinement will be the future Route 3 and what the transit line plays there.
All right, go ahead and advance. Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, there were 4 ped bike projects that we were evaluating. 2 of them are transit related, so it's that last mile connectivity, and again, an effort to stimulate use of VRE stations, specifically the Brook Road station and the Spotsylvania station. So This here captures our work. As I mentioned before, we already took all 4 of these in front of the Bike Ped Committee. 2 of these are being advanced with the final transit report, the idea that they are so transit-oriented, transit-focused, the other 2 with the roadway. So we split them up like that. So the first one, the Brook Station study area, you can see here, sort of the catchment areas, 2 alternative corridors that we were considering for making that connection from downtown Stafford to Brook Station. Our goal here was to identify what is that right corridor, what is the most appropriate corridor, looking at not only convenience and speed and how many people might be willing to use, but also the constraints. I know that we were talking about that from a high level for the roadway, also as far as these bike ped projects go. And we know that the corridors that we are considering here do have some constraints. The corridor that we're prioritizing here is the one that follows, oh my gosh, it's slipping my mind. Name of the road? It's an alternative courthouse, which is the preferred alternative from the...
Mount Hope Church, is that what it is?
Yes, thank you. So the East Coast Greenway alignment for the shared use path or the trail connectivity all along the East Coast actually had identified Courthouse Road and Andrew Chapel Road, but we like this corridor as a better alternative for various reasons. Not to say that it doesn't have its own constraints, chiefly the Civil War part, but on the other hand, that constraint could also be an advantage in that it provides nice connectivity to the Civil War part. We have low volume, low speed facility along this corridor, which makes it more attractive maybe, but we could still provide those stub outs to the major generators like the middle school and the high school to this shared use path. It also provides flexibility for a phased approach perhaps, using in-street facilities maybe for cyclists, and then ultimately to something that's more of a shared use path trail facility along this corridor. So this is very much in line with, as Ian pointed out, same group is doing both this and the pipeline. As part of the pipeline study, we were identifying ped-bike connectivity, and this just happens to align very, very well with what we were considering for this East-West mobility study as well. So as I mentioned, there are some constraints in addition to the environmental, cultural, historical associated with the Civil War. There's 3 stream crossings, and of course, this would require acquisition of land to be able to build what we would ultimately like to see here, a shared use path. This just gives you a conceptual view of ultimately what we think would be an attractive facility here for our vulnerable users, our bikes and peds. So moving on, the Spotsylvania, similarly, we're trying to make that connectivity from the major population centers down to the Spotsylvania station that Drew was circling, and also provide that east-west connectivity to the Germanna College and the shared use path that's being constructed now across 95. So this provides that nice connectivity from east to west as well as north to south. There's a shared use path that's being built to Germanna College, so this really provides that network for our pedestrians and cyclists to access the station, as well as points west and north. This alignment, I think we can go to the next sheet, it would be following the south side of US 17. There are advantages there. We have what appears to be sufficient right-of-way. It also provides flexibility to future widening of that corridor to the north, and that's and then as far as the north-south connection, what we'd be doing is following the rail. And this provides a lot of opportunity to work, and then we've reached out to the Department of Public Rail, first through DPRT, who has put us in touch with the new agency, Passenger Rail Authority, yep, thank you, as far as what our options might be, specifically as we get constrained at the underpass. We understand that there is the potential for future track there. So if you just jump ahead, you can see we've got some, this would be the section along Benchmark Road. So south of Benchmark Road, shared use path running parallel. This would be to the east side. And then next, this is that potential rail with trail that we'd like to coordinate with those transit agencies to understand the constructability and viability of putting this
here. Obviously, when you're in a rail corridor with an active rail, the separation is that much greater.
Yeah.
And of course, coordination, hopefully, if we stay to the east side, may lie with the Virginia agencies as opposed to with the railroad. So there might be some advantages here.
Yeah, I'll just say on that, if you can keep your concepts where the trail is on the east side of Benchmark Road as much distance as possible, I think that's going to make things a lot easier. And then also for the time being, and I don't know what BPRA said, but I would suspect they'll tell you follow the CSX public projects design guidelines for trails with rails. Yeah.
So where were we actually crossing Benchmark? So I'm on the east side of Benchmark, and then on the railroad trail, which is on the west side of Benchmark. Where do we cross the road? In terms of, going Line Road or at Merrily Carter Park somewhere? Or?
We've talked about a few different options. There's an existing underpass.
I can jump in too.
Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
There's at Haleslip Road is where it's going to be jumping from the east side of Benchmark Road over to the proposed rail width trail. There's going to be proposed for a roundabout there, and so there would be a bike and ped connection there.
So the west side of Benchmark Road, not the west side of the train line.
Correct.
Yes.
The train is always to our west.
Correct.
It's in this vicinity right where Haleslip is, and so so then.
Okay.
Thank you.
The road is east to east A here.
And again, this is a refined concept. We had looked at various alternatives following Benchmark Road. We looked at Eagle Drive as an alternative. We also looked at perhaps using the utility corridor, but for various constraints. This is the alignment that we ended up with proposing based on the feedback from the Bike Ped Committee and staff.
Is there any major concerns about topography and having it clear on that east side? That's the only concern that I've had in the Pelham's historic site at the corner of Benchmark. There seems to be some real steep topography up near like Mine Road intersection where the rail is. And you have one rail spur I know you run into, which is low volume, but is topography a real big issue?
The next phase of this will be to dive deeper into the constructability, the engineering side of this, preliminary engineering, I should say. We are aware of not only the topography constraints, but some environmental constraints as well. And at this high level right now, we think this is the right alignment. But,
And basically in that same area, like where you're talking about Mine Road, and you've got sort of trees and it's bermed up a little bit. Your west side, you're really in the rail right of way very quickly too. So you're sort of figuring out what's your
Yeah, and don't underestimate that spur because, new at-grade crossings of even minor industrial spurs is a very touchy subject with the railroads. And I mean, obviously that'll be state property on the right-hand side, but just be, mindful of that because it's not just, oh yeah, we'll just throw it across the, there's a big safety considerations that you have to.
Next.
Moving on. I think I covered this. It's just some background. Obviously, the constraints, you mentioned the spur. We also have some topography. That's a great, and then the at-grade crossing that you mentioned. So we do recognize some of these things, and we'll be diving into those a little bit deeper. This just shows you that 17, there's some topography issues with the south side of 17 too, but we like the south side. There could be some structural considerations, some retaining walls perhaps, but we like that we think we can get a 10 to 12 foot shared use path facility on that south side.
That lines up with I-95 bridge too, so that's good.
Exactly. All right. That just shows how the topography changes along the corridor. All right. We'll save the stakeholder until we get to the end. Now, these are the two that we are lumped together in the roadway report. The first one being the connectivity of the Carl D. Silver and the town center on the south side of Route 3 with points to the north and points to the east on the other side of 95 via Cowan and Fall Hill. We've investigated a couple of different alternatives, and where we've landed is a shared use path on the east side of Carl D. Silver Parkway, north of Cowan. South of there, it follows the alignment that was proposed as part of the small area plan. So we think that the ideal situation is to be on the east side. That lines up with the crossings over to the east side of I-95. It avoids some major intersection crossings up to the north. There are some constraints, there are some impacts. The impacts to the parking areas, for example, we think that it would probably consume about 165 parking spaces. Obviously, that's a political concern perhaps, but it still allows for the circulation of the vehicles in the shopping center. Again, this is a continuation of what is in the small area plans to the south. We did investigate the east side. You can see there's some green space back there, but from a safety and security point of view, as well as accessibility, we like keeping it along Carl D. Silver Parkway.
So, and it crosses Carl D. Silver Parkway at Cowan, is that right?
Correct. Yes, and that avoids some free flow situations up at Fall Hill.
And it's meant to connect with the shared use path on Cowan and the shared use path on Fall Hill. So the idea is to try and connect all of those into one network of bike and pedestrian trails. Part of my jobs coming here has been to try and connect, join the dots. So many transportation infrastructure projects in the region that don't connect to the next project. Sidewalks that don't, some people write in the newspaper, this sidewalk doesn't go anywhere. Well, it's a nice sidewalk, but it's only been built along 2 miles and then it stops. And the same thing with these bike paths, so they go quite far and then they don't always get you to the final destination.
Can you say a little bit more about how this crosses Route 3?
Yeah, so, and that, I mentioned that earlier, that was addressed as part of the pipeline study. We have some concept sketches there as far as how we can work that pedestrian signal phasing into that existing signal. We've done the traffic ops already for that as part of the pipeline study, so we have addressed that. So, and it would be on the west side based on the traffic operations and also from a safety standpoint. Drew, did you?
Oh, no, I was just going to ask if you wanted to give any more color to what that looks like, I think, to our question.
Because on that particular road, isn't there 2 right turn lanes from Route 3 with traffic that doesn't stop?
So I think what would be helpful in future is that
Oh, it's on the east side, you're right, thank you.
with your slides and with the final report on this,
yes,
if you could put in 1 or 2 diagrams from the pipeline study, which you also did, in order to just join the dots for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, we tried to squeeze this down. We had some concept sketches for the Bike Ped Committee that we can pull back into this slideshow as well. No, this is at the mall court extension. So you do have turn lanes there, but nothing that we can't engineer around to provide connections.
A suggestion. So the city is just recently had a TRC meeting, a technical review committee with the developer who's come forward with a proposal for that long, skinny remaining open space right there. The city is asking for them to include extension of Gordon Shelton Boulevard through that property, meeting Cowan. So that could be an opportunity to extend the multi-use path along that parcel. Just wanted to throw it out there, not saying we can't have it on both. Pedestrian infrastructure is great, but yeah.
And we did talk about the potential for additional development there. Do you have any documentation on?
I can ask Mike to send you I actually have it in my email too, if I catch up yet.
Sure, that'd be great.
I just wanted to say, because I'm familiar with the kind of the Carl D. Silver, like what that looks like when you're standing on the ground or when you're on 2 wheels. And these proposals might need to prompt a bigger discussion about at what point do we say, all right, are people actually going to feel comfortable, even if you've got a 12-foot wide or a 10-foot wide path, and when you get to these major intersection points and you're asking them to cross at grade, you know, and whether or not there's no turn on red restrictions or there are in the future, you know, as part of those facilities. And so maybe a bigger conversation around grade separation of some kind needs to be had at where's the trigger point in either AADT or, you know, level of traffic stress or whatever, to where you say, you know what, this is going to be a much better facility if you just plan to spend the money now to do grade separation. I'm actually really heartened by some of the stuff that, excuse me, that they've done out in the New River Valley MPO, where, you know, around Virginia Tech, they just said, you know, we're just going to put it underneath these major roadways and spend the money now to put box culverts underneath, you know, to provide, you know, continuous through access for bike ped. And it's really nice. And it's like you think, oh, well, Blacksburg can do it, you know, Fredericksburg might be able to do it too. I see this, I think like, oh, this would be an awesome facility, and it would really connect a lot of potential job and employment centers and housing, but, at what point is it like, yeah, this isn't gonna be very useful if, you're asking someone to cross like literally 16 lanes of traffic, so.
The look on Becky's face just now said, I hope you brought your checkbook.
And again, I'm just saying this from this is best planning transportation. It has nothing to do with VRE directly, but I just think, we need to have a little more of an enlightening conversation about that. I understand, multi-use path on a 2-lane, country road,
For Route 3, I agree with you, and I made that point at the Route 3 pipeline study.
I recognize that, and it's what the localities are willing to stomach.
I agree with you. I think that first section of Route 3 is going to be redesigned sooner than later, but we've got to find the money.
Yeah, point very well taken. I'm a Hokie and very familiar with the trail and the new bridge a few years ago. And I was also hearing the registers. How do we justify that now?
Yeah.
Question. So last but not least, just because we're running out of time, we also look at ped bike connectivity from downtown Fredericksburg to the other side of the river and using Chatham Heights.
Brand new bridge. The brand new bridge.
Brand new bridge, exactly. And the facility, as Ian alluded to earlier, any new facility, well, this is one of those new facilities that is coming with shared use path, and we'd like to connect to it and continue it up Chatham Heights Road. And that's exactly what we're proposing. And on Kings Highway, the way that we propose doing it is to take advantage of the existing shoulder on the south side. That roadway is evolving. And we think that excessive shoulder is something that we can probably take better advantage of using it as a shared use path. You could probably just jump ahead.
And for those of you who were just now shouting at me about building all these new road lanes and more road lanes and more road lanes, well, this proposal is to take away road lanes, and I'm sure VDOT and Alex are ready to murderize me for even thinking about this. This wasn't my proposal, but I can tell you now, this is taking away road lanes and giving them to bikes. So
on Chatham Heights Road, on Kings Highway, it's actually taking away the shoulder, which may or may not be a design waiver or exception, depending on what that facility is and will be in the future, as opposed to what it was and why that shoulder was there. But that's what you see here is a shared use path on the south side, I believe retaining a sidewalk on the north side of the road. Now, if you go back a couple slides, what Ian was talking about as far as Chatham Heights Road is a roadway reconfiguration, or what we used to call diet. This is a traditional 4-to-3, at least on the southern half of the roadway. The idea is that we would take away a lane, but provide a 2-way left turn lane in the center of the road, getting our left turns out of through traffic, allowing them to have that space. It also provides potential median refuge for crossing of Chatham Heights Road. A lot of good benefits to that, limiting exposure of our pedestrians crossing the street. It's a traffic calming effect. We're looking at the AET on that road, and it fits in very nicely with what is typical of a 4-to-3 roadway reconfiguration. So whether, and again, we're not into the preliminary engineering of this yet, you see some cross sections, but whether that's a buffer with flex tube or a median separated facility is still to be determined. The north side of it would still remain with a center median island, and then taking the outer lanes in either direction for a bike lane in either direction. I know Alex had mentioned some concerns about the number of driveways, and we have familiarity with similar corridors, with similar access points, so we think it can be done, and we think that's the preferred alternative to taking a lot of land to put in a shared, because we are limited as far as rights are concerned. Those are the 4 ped bike projects that we are to. With that, if there's any questions.
I just have one really quick one about Germana Point. So we initially were thinking the west side as well. We ended up filing a TAP application that scored really well, but unfortunately just didn't get selected to go from 17 to most of the way to Germana. We had community college, we had to be sensitive to costs. But through scoping out with VDOT, actually, what ended up coming out of that is we were advised to put that actually, in this case, on the east side. And so actually want to put in with our TAP application, they switch sides of the road. I think there may have been some sort of underground utility infrastructure. There was some reason why we ended up having to switch it, and I'll provide this to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I understand why you would do it, because we actually have a shared use path on Hospital Boulevard on the road crossing gonna have to just address it at the crossing. But I'll
Sure.
give this to you all, just so you have it. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Maybe just email it over to them.
yeah, that's fine.
Great. Okay, everyone, I'm going to open in a minute for any last comments, but the meeting has gone on long today. But remember, we're meeting less frequently. So there is a long meeting today, but you don't have another one again until October. And we haven't had one since, was it May? So sorry it's been a long meeting, but there was lots to show you and to ask for your input on. And we're not bugging you as frequently as we did previously, so you get a respite from the next meeting. All right, so any last comments, questions to the team on these projects? Please feel free to email comments and questions if you have any to me, and I'll coordinate with staff and with the VHB team. If anybody sees any major problem, like there's one of these projects where you think this thing is a major problem, tell us at this time. Don't tell us in 5 months' time when we're engineering the corner of the particular sidewalk. Then it's too late. Tell us now you have this big problem, and then VHB can go and look at that big problem now before we get into detailed engineering. So that's the point of today, is for you to look at this and go, this all looks great, but this one thing over here I think is going to be a problem. Please email us those concerns. We'll give it to VHB and they can look through your problems, and hopefully we'll have some great projects at the end of it. On your agenda, I put their next steps so you can see where we're going. The transit report is going to go to the TAC now, then the policy committee, and then out for public comment. So you have another round then to put in your own comments on the transit report because it's not yet finalized. It will go out for public comment. The roadways and final bikehead recommendations are coming to you as a report, I believe, at the October meeting. The policy committee needs to adopt both the transit and roadway report by the end of the year, because the final stage of this study is to take the list of projects we're actually going to start working on funding applications through some preliminary engineering. And that's the final phase. So before we get to any preliminary engineering, we want to have settled the question of which projects are for us the most important, the most urgent, the ones that we need to actually put in for applications sooner, and then the ones that have a longer time horizon or perhaps don't seem as strong projects, we will then put in the report as these studies, but without detailed engineering, because we're not going to advance them to funding immediately. So that's where we're headed with this. And then they will be doing the engineering work and the preparation, which includes a costing for the project and where they think we could get the funding, who's hiding their checkbook, will come in that last step. Everybody good with where we are?
So, will these projects be done in time to be able to submit for some of, it seems like there's been a lot of opportunities for grants and things to do these projects. So, for example, the governor, or in the budget, state budget, there was $90-some million set aside for rails and so forth. So, I mean, are we following in the timeline to where both state and federal monies that these projects, for example, the bike pedestrian trails can be done, actually come to fruition?
So you'll remember we said that there were 5 bike projects and we pulled one off because it's gone to funding already, it's gone to smart scale. So these are being designed for the next round of smart scale, which would only start a year from now.
Yes, but I think you're referring to funding outside of the smart scale stream. This would be special federal funding that's come available. And you probably know more about that than we do because you're speaking of it. So maybe you could dig into that a little.
So we certainly are going to not only consider smart scale funding. There are federal grants under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act which we can apply for, but you know, there's a cycle that goes for this year plus another 4 years, that funding. So we want to get these projects completed by March so that for the next round of funding in the federal grants on the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and there's a whole list of them, it's like an entire industry of grants that's opened up recently. for the next round, we would like to have one or more of these projects available for that round of funding.
That's what I'm hoping.
There you go.
That roadway reconfiguration, by the way, is one of the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program systemic improvements that the state is really pushing, and that might be something that we could generate a grant application for right now for the November 1st deadline, I believe.
And which project?
The Chatham Heights.
Okay, so Alex over there, the handsome chap in the blue shirt, if we can convince him to convince his county to support it, or if we can go with him to convince his county to support it, we'd then be able to put in that funding application. But FAMPO wouldn't do that without the county.
The interesting short part about the road diet type of, that is about as inexpensive a project as you can get, particularly if you can line it up with our paving schedule. Because then it's just straight. It's like, you just move things around.
There'll be some barrier to protect the bike.
Yeah, right. It
So
depends on what you need.
there'll be a barrier and so on that we would need. But that would be a great, so Mr. Lynch, you will maybe be able to cycle the bike across that brand new bridge all the way up Chatham Heights Road, if the county is in agreement. So we hope they'll give us some comment. And I have never sent you a request for a letter of support for that thing. I was just pulling your leg. But if Fiore wants to give us a letter of support, I will gladly receive it.
Hey, anything that gets...
Thank you, everybody. Any last comments? I'm about to close the meeting. Sorry it's been so long, but we won't bother you again until October, except please email your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just do a coffee with you and the Germanic.
Thanks, guys. Good presentation.